Thank you, and good evening, and please be seated. Welcome to the White House and to the East Room. I want to begin by thanking everyone who helped make this very exciting evening a reality. Tom Hanks not only conceived of this remarkable series, but also produced, directed, wrote, and acted in From the Earth to the Moon. I also want to thank Jeff Bewkes and the team at HBO, Time Warner, and Imagine Films for helping to bring this series to our nation. We are also honored to be joined by, and you will hear from later, John F. Kennedy Jr., and I'm delighted that we have so many present and former astronauts in the audience, including Senator Glenn, and I would like to ask all of the present and former astronauts of our country to please stand so we could recognize you. In tonight's presentation, we will see a remarkable group of Americans, some of whom are here with us this evening, who through hard work and teamwork and just old-fashioned American can-do spirit managed to launch men into space, send them to the moon, and bring them safely home again. When President Kennedy first proposed that the United States send a mission to the moon, his science advisor had one question for the engineers and scientists: can we do this? The answer, as we will see vividly tonight, was a resounding yes. As in every other period of American history when we faced a difficult test, the citizens of this nation rose to the challenge and triumphed over seemingly insurmountable odds. That is the spirit that has always pushed us to conquer new frontiers of space and time. Many of us can remember exactly where we were when Americans first set foot on the moon. This last 4th of July, we were all riveted watching the Pathfinder and a robot named Sojourner Truth explore the surface of Mars. And I will personally never forget today standing next to Colonel Eileen Collins as we announced that she will become the first woman ever to command a space shuttle. The question often asked about our space program is not just whether we can reach the heavens, but also what we can discover there to improve the lives of people here on Earth. The knowledge we gain from our space missions is already helping us unlock the secrets behind deadly diseases and bringing health care to people in remote communities of the world. I hope that all of us, as we watch this program tonight, will reflect back on our own feelings about what the space program has meant to us, how it inspired us, and how we hope it will continue to inspire generations of young Americans. I wish all of you could have been with us today at Dunbar High School here in the district, talking with students who are enrolled in a special pre-engineering program with Tom Hanks and Colonel Collins and I was very pleased that they were able to ask straightforward questions of all three of us. I thought at first all the questions might be about Big or Apollo 13 or Forrest Gump, but instead what the young people wanted to know was how to afford a college education and what it takes to be an astronaut. That's why I'm pleased that HBO will be sending more than 40,000 educational packets that complement From the Earth to the Moon to schools around the country. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Jeff Bewkes, the chairman of HBO. We're delighted that Jeff and HBO have chosen the White House to come here tonight to help celebrate this remarkable series. We feel honored to be part of this, and we feel that we are helping to honor not only those of you who have been the pioneers and explorers of the past, but all of those young Americans who will see this series, who all of a sudden will say to themselves, I can do that. And if it is not going into space, it will be something else that will be a challenge that they will meet because of the inspiration of your lives, your work, and a series like this. Thank you very much, Mr. Bewkes.
Thank you, Mrs. Clinton, Mr. President, distinguished guests, including our own Time Warner Chairman, Jerry Levin, and his wife, Barbara. On behalf of everyone at HBO, we are very honored, and on behalf, I hope, of everyone here, to be here tonight to celebrate genuine American heroes, the Apollo astronauts. And our series chronicles an extraordinary achievement which the people behind, the many men and women behind the space program did accomplish. And also, what we tried to do in making this series represented quite a stretch for us. So in order to bring a project like this to the screen, we needed a team of very talented and a fairly large team of people. I'd like to thank Tom Hanks, Brian Grazer, Ron Howard, Michael Bostic, and Chris Albrecht, and all the people at HBO who worked so hard to bring this to the screen you're about to see. There's not a more fitting place to premiere this series than at the White House. So I would like to thank Mrs. Clinton and the President for so graciously welcoming us to their home. And now to introduce this episode, Mr. Tom Hanks.
Thank you. Mrs. Clinton, President Clinton, let me just quickly reiterate a couple of words that have already been said, but you only get one shot at this, in this room, in this building, with this company. Our gathering here tonight would not have happened were it not for Jeff Bewkes and Chris Albrecht of the home box office. They and their team of executives gave the go to this massive, expensive television undertaking long ago, and over the course of the past 2 years, they were always upfront with their suggestions for creative alternatives, but never, ever so much as hinted that we could or should compromise the integrity of the story we're trying to tell. Jeff and Chris and all of HBO were dedicated to the grand objective of From the Earth to the Moon and determined to produce just as inspiring a storytelling record as is the legacy of the Apollo program itself. Jeff, Chris, God bless you and thank you. And my good friends Brian Grazer and Ron Howard and their company Imagine Entertainment were instrumental in our producing what you're about to see tonight. They were, in fact, the originators of the medium, because their film, Apollo 13, was actually groundbreaking in its emotional telling of a story which had no bad guys, had an ending that everybody knew, and essentially, at its most basic, was the 2-hour movie about rocket science gone wrong. I was lucky to make that trip to the moon on celluloid with Brian and Ron, and luckier still to be a part of this crew, to have their faith and their trust and their help in bringing these other dramatized lunar voyages to life. So, Brian and Ron, God bless you and thank you. Now, should you have the pleasure tonight of meeting one of the Apollo astronauts who stood up here, be they Mr. Mattingly, Mr. Aldrin, Mr. Cernan, Mr. Schmidt, who I saw in the back, I want you to take special note that these people who flew into space 30 years or so ago are mortal men. They are made of flesh and sinew, of blood and brain, and when allied with hundreds of thousands of other like-minded human beings, they helped make a fact where there had been only fiction. And by their simple choosing to do so, despite the fact that it put them in harm's way, and despite the fact that the pay was not all that great, and despite the fact that the long hours absolutely consumed the lives of themselves and their families, these human beings demonstrated the natural audacity of all human beings by believing that they could do anything. And then they lived up to the great promise of our being placed on this planet by actually doing it. For all but a flicker of our history in this world, a flight into space, a flight to the moon, was the fantasy of the addle-brained or foolhardy, for common sense dictated that the rigors of such a journey required the presence of divine beings or supermen. And yet, when the time came for the quest to be undertaken, the representatives of the human race who volunteered had names like Buzz and Pete and Jim and they were from places like Milwaukee and Fort Worth and Albuquerque. They are not all that different from you or I, save their resolve, their discipline, their wherewithal, their education, their training. Consider then that these human beings, many of them here tonight, are the only creatures in the cosmos that we know have traveled to another planet. And that makes the stories that we have chosen to bring you tonight not merely the tales of technological brilliance or great political pride. The tale of Apollo is a human story, the story of the human condition, about what human beings can grasp and about what we can accomplish when we choose to do so. Because when we choose to do so, we can get the hard things done. We can develop the vaccines that conquer disease, and we can teach our kids how to read. We can even put in place programs that will help inner city students who now like to call themselves pre-engineers. We can make them engineers as they grow up. Those things are hard to do, but we can get them done. And who knows, we might really be able to dream the impossible things into a reality. We might be able to figure out a way to take this fragile blue ball that from outer space has only colors and none of them are borders, and we might be able to someday figure out a way to all get along on it. How do we do this? How do we dare have such faith in ourselves and in each other? Well, we can dare these impossible dreams because from December of 1968 to December of 1972, 24 human beings, not all that different from you or me, made the impossible yet divine voyage from the Earth to the Moon. And Lord knows, if we can figure out a way to do that, there is nothing we cannot do. What you'll be seeing now is about 6 minutes of very self-explanatory highlights from the first 3 episodes of From the Earth to the Moon, and then in its totality, another self-explanatory episode, number 4, titled 1968. Sit back and enjoy From the Earth to the Moon. Thank you.
That was a wonderful film, really. Remarkable. I'm honored to be here in the White House. Excuse me, President Clinton and Mrs. Clinton, distinguished guests. I'm honored to be here in the White House, standing only a few yards from where President Kennedy first made the decision to send Americans to the moon and return them safely back to Earth before the decade of the 1960s was over. In hindsight, the choice looks obvious, but at the time, it was, in a very real sense, President Kennedy's alone, made against the opposition of conservatives who thought the priority should be warheads, and liberals who call the project moondoggle and believe that the money should be better spent on social programs. One White House science aide said, quote, "Manned spaceflight will be man's most expensive funeral." And the budget director fretted that the estimated $40 billion price tag would bust the entire $98 billion federal budget. Dwight Eisenhower pondered in the Saturday Evening Post, "What is the great hurry to get to the moon?" And Senator William Proxmire denounced the space program as corporate socialism. The space program is perhaps my father's proudest legacy, but the connection is a personal one as well. Andrei Gromyko gave my parents a dog named Pushinka, which was supposedly the daughter of Laika, the first dog in space. Pushinka's only trace of her celebrated lineage was a seemingly innate ability to endlessly climb up and down a slide that my mother had built for us on the White House lawn. Pushinka is, of course, no longer with us. She abruptly was sent to the home of a nice Secret Service man in Ohio after biting me in the eye. And Laika, alas, is still in space. Senator John Glenn's triumphant parade down Pennsylvania Avenue and address to the joint sessions of Congress. After that, he arrived at the White House and was received by the President, who was then to present him with the Distinguished Service Medal. When my sister Caroline, who was 5 at the time, was introduced to America's most acclaimed hero, she looked at him, looked at my father, looked back at Mr. Glenn, nonplussed, and said, "Where's the monkey?" She had in mind the chimp named Enos, who orbited the Earth in a Mercury space capsule in an earlier experimental launch. After Glenn's speech that day, Arthur Kroc, ever the astute judge of character, observed of Glenn, quote, "He has a latent natural gift for his natural gift is a latent talent for politics that might loft him to the highest reaches if he is willing to cooperate." President Kennedy's speech that first put the challenge of space travel to the American people and laid the groundwork for the seamless blending of political will and popular imagination that made Apollo possible is a memorable one. It's remarkable for it reveals his fascination with the technical challenges of space travel, for its inspiring cadence, and for its utter lack of punctuation. And if I may just read a brief segment of it, it is the speech that you saw in the beginning at the stadium at Rice University in Houston, Texas in 1962. "If I were to say, my fellow citizens, that we shall send to the moon 240,000 miles away from the control station in Houston, a giant rocket more than 300 feet tall, the length of this football field, made of new metal alloys, some of which have not yet been invented, capable of standing heat and stresses several times more than had ever been experienced, fitted together with a precision better than the finest watch, carrying all the equipment needed for propulsion, guidance, control, communication, food, and survival, on an untried mission to an unknown celestial body, and then return it safely to Earth, re-entering the atmosphere at speeds of over 25,000 miles an hour, causing heat about half that of the temperature of the sun, and so all this, and do it right, and do it first before the decade is out, then we must be bold." But today there is an American flag on a windless plane on the moon because the challenge to explore space stirred something deep and indelible in the American character. And while all the dire predictions never came true, and the technological payoff can be found in everything from computers to freeze-dried foods to scratch-proof sunglasses, we are richer as a nation with the vivid memory of that first step on the moon. To the Moon helps us reconnect with that memory once again. So thank you, HBO, and thank you, Tom Hanks, for your efforts, and thank you, Mr. President, for recognizing the energy, faith, and vision of the pioneers of space and of film. And now it is my great honor to introduce a man who found a common bond with John Kennedy's faith in government and individual initiative, and a leader who responded to the President's call to public service with as much commitment, ability, and vision as anyone of his generation, President Bill Clinton. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to all. Thank you, John Kennedy, for those wonderful remarks. Thank you, Jeff Bucas, for taking a chance on this project. I know it's a big, big project. I predict it will get a big, big response from the American people. Thank you, Tom Hanks, and thank all of you who were part of this. I'd also like to thank the people at NASA with whom you worked. I'm sure many of them are here for the work they do every day. I thank all the astronauts who are here, and we're especially proud of Lieutenant Colonel Eileen Collins, who will be our first woman mission leader very soon. There's not much more that needs to be said, but as one of the graduates of the class of 1968, I want to thank all of you for saving 1968 all over again. Hillary today, when we honored Eileen Collins, pointed out that when she was a young girl, she wrote off to NASA and asked for information about how to be an astronaut. And she was told that at the time women were not welcome in the program. Today, we see that change. The growth of the space program and the way it's changed and strengthened is in many ways evidence of the growth of America over the last 3 decades. And I think any of us who've had anything to do with it have been profoundly proud of it. Hillary mentioned the Mars mission that seemed once again to sort of spark the popular imagination in our nation for the space program, with the wonderful sojourner looking around for red rocks with wonderful names like Scooby-Doo. You know, the International Space Station will be up before long, and it will literally be the size of a football field. Now, the vehicle John Glenn went up in over 35 years ago was about the size of a compact car. And when the space station is there, it will change forever the way people can relate to the Earth and to the other planets in the solar system. All of this has happened for a lot of reasons. There are members of Congress here, and I thank them for their presence. Congress continued to support the space station and the space program against the kinds of criticisms that are still current today that John so eloquently chronicled from the 1960s. President Kennedy wanted us to become the world's leading spacefaring nation, and we have. I want us to continue that distinction well into the 21st century. It is profoundly important to us. Colonel Collins, for example, will lead us in an effort to launch a telescope that will allow us to peer into the deepest reaches of outer space. The new balanced budget will support 28 more space missions to help us decipher more of the mysteries of black holes, of ancient stars, of the Earth itself. The knowledge we gain from these missions will help us to solve problems here on Earth, from osteoporosis to ovarian cancer. It will help to make our farms more productive. It will help us to deal with the crisis of global warming. And as the distinguished scientist Stephen Hawking, who will be in this place tomorrow night, has pointed out, it may well help us uncover the very origins of human life itself. I hope all of you who are part of this project will be able to look back 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now with immense pride that you have once again sparked the imagination, the dreams, the hopes, and the courage of the American people to follow our astronauts into space and to follow our imaginations wherever they lead. Thank you, and God bless you. There's so many wonderful people here tonight. I hesitate to acknowledge anyone, but someone who helped us all get through that era is here. Walter Cronkite, thank you very much for your presence. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. And now Hillary and I would like to invite you all into the state dining room for a reception where we will try to stay on both feet on the ground. Thank you and bless you. Let's go in.